Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil dich ein in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil dich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist. Weil dich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to a very rare edition of Midweek Socialism Live. I know the intro said Saturday because normally we only watch socialism on Saturday. And I really should make a different kind of like video for when we do special live midweek socialism, but I don't have time for that right now because it can be Saturday in our hearts. Because we are going to be doing a very special edition of socialism with our old friends at Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books just loves it when I snipe their stream. And they are doing a live stream. And I'm pretty sure everyone watching the live stream, which has already started, I'm pretty sure everyone watching it is from my channel. So you're welcome, Haymarket Books. I feel like we're a team, Haymarket Books. I know we're not in solidarity. I know I'm not a comrade. I know, okay, fine. But I feel like we can really work together on this. You guys want to talk about socialism. I want to talk about socialism. You guys want to share your ideas. We want to hear your ideas. I don't know why we always have to fight, Haymarket Books. I don't know why you need to make this so difficult. But and Haymarket Books should know we don't ask like crappy socialist questions. We ask pointed socialist questions. We aren't going, and I don't want to see anyone going over there and going into their chat and going, "Why are you selling books?" I swear to God. If any of you go over to their chat and you go, "Why are you selling books if you hate capitalism?" I am banning you from my chat for doing that. If you're going to go over to their chat, you're going to ask good questions. Okay? We are not beginners. We watch socialism like 6 days a week. We are not going in with the conservative owning the lib bullshit. I will not be represented like that. Absolutely not. But tonight, starting in about 8 minutes, Haymarket Books, which is the largest socialist book publisher in the United States, is doing a live stream with a bunch of teachers because teachers are socialists. I mean, you can go over there. I'm just saying, like, we're not going to behave like hooligans if we go over there. We're going to be nice. We're going to be respectful. We are not going to disrupt their stuff. I do not want to see any spamming of the chat. I don't co-sign that, okay? I'm being serious right now. I know I do a joking voice sometimes, but like, I don't want to be embarrassed by you. You are all adults. I have trained you to behave like dogs. I have brought you to heel with my rules of the chat so that you guys don't go out into the world and behave like hooligans, okay? But you can go over to their chat. In fact, I'll put the link over there if you guys want to go over. Just be respectful and ask good questions, and I will feed you the questions. I will tell you, ask them this in the chat. And sometimes Haymarket Books has been kind enough to answer a question here or there. Red May answers more of our questions. Sean, who is the most handsome of all socialists, who does his thing with Red May, Sean has answered my question before. He was very nice about it and very respectful because we were respectful of him. And Sean likes us because I call him the most handsome of all socialists. But like, no, we are not spamming. We're not doing bullshit. But we are going to be watching a live Haymarket Books presentation called Teaching Through a Collective Liberation Framework in Our Schools. That means public schools. That means public schools. No bullshit bot. Our schools and communities. Join PAR CEO, which I don't remember what that stands for. It's something like no, I don't know, some sort of radical educator thing. Join PAR CEO and Haymarket Books as educators and organizers committed to just learning spaces. Just learning spaces means socialist learning spaces, and critical inquiry will speak about their work and challenges, bringing urgent social justice issues. Social justice means socialism into our schools and communities. And we have Nina, who is the community educator and director of PAR CEO, a resource and education center. We have Leslie, who is an educator, organizer, and writer. We have a person's name I'm not going to be able to pronounce, who is also an educator, organizer, and writer. And we have Carlos, who has been an educator in the New York City public schools for 24 years. And we have Natalie and Nassim, who are educators with the New York Radical Educators, the New York Collective of Radical Educators. So, if you are wondering if the people that we're watching tonight who are socialists on a socialist YouTube channel who all work for socialist organizations, if you are wondering if these people teach your kids in public schools, the answer is yes. And they're going to tell you about the things that they're teaching your kids in public schools. And it's going to be a great night, guys. The presentation will get started in 5 minutes. I will put the link in the chat if you guys want to go over. Hang on. Here is what we're watching. But I'm serious about this. If you're going to go over there, be respectful. Do not embarrass me. Do not ask bullshit owning the libs questions that we already know the answer to. Because if you guys ask a bullshit like owning the libs question, they aren't going to answer our real questions, okay? One of the reasons it's fun to do this is that sometimes they actually answer questions. We can ask them what they think, and they will tell us what they think. But they're not going to answer our questions if we're causing them problems. All right? So be nice, be respectful. Don't break their rules. If they tell you to stop doing something, stop doing it. And if I see anyone saying in that chat, why do you sell books if you're against capitalism? I'm going to ban you in my chat. And I'm not even joking about that because that question is beneath us. We are advanced at socialism. We are not fucking conservatives. We are not beginners. We understand their ideology. And this is a time for us to be able to ask good questions to get more information about their ideology. I'm not screwing around. It's fine to have fun. If you want to shitpost, come over here and we can have fun over here, but don't do it in their chat. No, you cannot ask them why they don't go to Cuba or Venezuela. No. Bad. No. Bad. Hit yourself on the hand right now. God. Can't take you guys anywhere. As a reminder, guys, before we get started, please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack. That is Carlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. And if you appreciate what I'm doing in terms of bringing you this socialist content that no one else on the internet is showing you, and you want to see me keep doing it, please consider signing up for a membership of $8 a month or $80 a year. I am 100% completely funded by you. If you head over to the Substack now, you're going to find articles about explaining the difference between institutional power and political power, which is something that people really need to understand. You're going to find the new socialist dictionary that I just launched last week. You are going to find an article about polyamory therapists and how they're going to queer the nuclear family. I got a whole bunch of stuff I'm going to be putting up about that new communist party that just launched yesterday. We got a lot we're going to be talking about this week on the Substack, so you can subscribe for free at carlyn.substack.com. But if you would be so kind, please consider supporting my work, because I cannot do it without people signing up on the Substack to support my work for $8 a month, $80 a year. You get a whole bunch of perks when you do that. I really, really do appreciate it, guys, because no one else is going to show you the content I'm showing you, so I really can't do it without you. You also have time to head over to the Unwoke Art store. You can pick up for another couple days the 4 Goals of the Woke Left t-shirt for 25% off, or you can get a hoodie or a bag or a pint glass. Now, you're going to be able to get all this stuff after the next couple days, but this is 25% off through the end of the month only. You are also going to be able to pick up the limited edition Unwoke Wiki Plague Doctor shirt, bunch of other stuff over there. So head over to the Unwoke Art store, get yourself a piece of merch, and that also does help to support the work I'm doing. All right, let's set up the sound. Let's do this. Why not? And I'll turn up their sound so we can hear them, because they are like, oh man, like in that last stream, I had this sound on full blast and I could not find the browser window. I was like, why do I have this open 3 times? I could not find it. I was like, oh God. It's very nice of them to put on this festive music. Hopefully their sound will be good. I hope everyone's having a good day. No. Only, guys, if you're going to ask them questions, only ask them questions related to the content they're talking about. No fucking around. I'm actually really annoyed that I have to give this instruction. No fucking around. If you do not have a question related to what they are talking about, don't ask it. Is it ethical to not pay students for their mental labor teachers are asking to be done? That's a good question. This is an example of a good question, guys, where you're really getting in there and you're putting something out there that is actually poignant to what they talk about, but it's not douchey. It's not an owning the libs question. This is a good question. I approve. Blessed. Thank you. No, but they're not, is the thing. I've been round and round about this with people before. They're not messing with me. If I'm not explicit, and I've seen this happen on multiple occasions, they will go and fuck around in the chat, and I do not want that. Well, if you're all just joking, then why would I give this warning? Because I've seen it happen right in front of me. So no. I think you're joking because you realize how pissed I am. Anyway. You guys are allowed to go over there. I don't mind if you go over there, you know? But we will have the chat on and we will be watching, is all I'm saying. Does someone want to... Well, don't ask it right now. Don't ask Brian's question right now in the chat. Like, wait until they get into the presentation, okay? Just wait. Don't do it right now. Have some form to this, guys. Joshua tells me I'm mothering the internet. Like, I don't have kids. I don't want kids. I mother the fucking internet. That's all right. You're allowed to go over there if you want. You're allowed. That's funny if you were over there accidentally, though. God. No, I let the beer happen in the moment. We don't plan beers ahead. That has to be a spontaneous experience, you know, Tim? I likes my money and I likes my freedom. I don't want kids.
Stick to a
Thank you, though.
Intensely radical politics.
Previews are on, guys. That means it's starting soon.
You're not broke if you're taxing rich people.
We break production for profit and we replace it by production for need.
This event is brought to you by Haymarket Books. Now more than ever, it is critical to support independent publishers, independent bookstores, and independent voices. There are two ways you can do this today. First, by buying books from Haymarket at haymarketbooks.org. And secondly, by joining the Haymarket Book Club. The following event will be recorded and shared afterwards on the Haymarket Books YouTube channel. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video now, and share it with as many people as possible. If you like this event, be sure to catch these upcoming events in Haymarket's live stream series. You can register for these upcoming events on the Haymarket Books Eventbrite page. If you miss an event, you can listen to the recording afterward by subscribing to our podcast, Haymarket Live, wherever you get your podcasts. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. We are moderating the chat, but we cannot guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. People who violate these guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we are able.
Everyone
This
be
event
good.
will have live closed captions. Instructions for accessing the captions will be posted in the chat. We should have time for Q&A, so please post your questions in the YouTube chat window, and we'll get to those later in the program.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us today. Our event
Thank
will
you,
begin
Haymarket.
shortly.
We appreciate you. I wonder if this was recorded in advance or if they really are doing it live. Last time we did this, they recorded it in advance, but sometimes they do it live too. Hello, Rob. It's good to see you. We're doing live socialism tonight. I appreciate you, Rob. Say hi to Mel for me. There's no sound. There's no sound. Look, they also have challenging anti-Semitism because they're being accused of being anti-Semites because they're all pro-Hamas. So they have to specifically. Well, I don't know if it's pre-recorded or not. Sometimes they do pre-recorded. Sometimes they do live. Why isn't it starting though? Like it's got captions, but why isn't the video starting? Do I need to reload?
of Parseo, NICOR,
that's
Rethinking
weird.
Schools, and of course, Haymarket Books. I'm so pleased to welcome everyone this evening. I am a co-director of Parseo together with Donna Neville, who has been a
Parseo.
long-time educator and organizer among many
Thank
other
you.
issues for
Parseo
educational justice.
works
And as
within the
part of our work,
California
Parseo has
Department of
developed a range of
Education.
participatory social justice curricula. Most recently, the Palestinian Nakba curriculum with Project 48, which, as we know, has become more
Developing a
relevant
social
than
justice
ever
curriculum.
at this moment. And as part of our commitment to co-creating curricula with our partners that address issues of injustice and that challenge dominant exclusionary narratives, we've also developed our curriculum on anti-Semitism from a framework of collective liberation. And the curriculum is rooted in a deep
What does that mean?
commitment to mutuality, solidarities, and joint struggle in our work to challenge anti-Semitism
Bet you it's
and all forms
anti-Zionist.
of injustice. Our hope is that it contributes to the work that so many are doing, including the amazing educators and organizers we are so fortunate to have with us this evening, to create just learning spaces and opportunities to engage in critical inquiry about urgent social justice issues in our schools and in our communities, especially at this moment when so many are facing repression for doing just that. To open up the program with our fantastic educator panelists, we want to share just a few slides from our curriculum, which is connected to our work for justice in our different educational spaces. And can you please put slide 1 up? Okay. The curriculum, which includes articles, poetry, visuals, videos, music, and other resources, is geared towards many different communities, and we offer several modes of engagement for workshops and classes. Can you please put up slide 2? And here are just some of the topics in the curriculum.
Immigration, race,
Next
racialization.
slide, please. In the first part of the curriculum, we discuss and make visible different Jewish histories based on class, race, geographies, and other experiences. Slide 4, please. Jewish ethnic groups include Ashkenazi Jews who are from Eastern and Western Europe and Russia, Mizrahi Jews and Jeswana who originate from Middle Eastern, North African, and Central Asian countries, Sephardi Jews from Spanish and Portuguese backgrounds and from Balkan countries, Jews from Ethiopia, Uganda, India, and China. And we share how Jews from these different localities have had different histories and experiences with anti-Semitism. Next slide, please.
No, we are not asking questions about the Jews.
Further on what anti-Semitism is and how it has shown up. Here are just a few images and quotes reflecting how anti-Semitism has manifested at different historical moments, from the Spanish Inquisition, created to eliminate non-Catholics, including Muslims and Jews, to the Holocaust, the most extreme, brutal anti-Semitic period in Jewish history, with over 6 million Jewish victims of the genocide. The Nazis also brutalized and persecuted millions of other people on a racial and political basis. So we see and show throughout the curriculum how anti-Semitism intersects with different targets and histories of systemic violence and injustice. And next slide, please. We engage in conversation and share a number of excerpts from educators and scholars reflecting on anti-Semitism, as well as its relationship to other forms of racism. And next slide, please. Through conversation, exploration, and participation, including roundtable conversations like this one and others that we've created, we ground the curriculum in a framework of and a commitment to collective liberation. And next slide, please. There are two clearly distinct views of the history of anti-Semitism. One views anti-Semitism as eternal and in isolation from other forms of oppression. It is never ending, it can't be understood, and it can't be stopped. The other perspective, which we adhere to in this curriculum, understands anti-Semitism as historically contextual, situated amidst interconnected conditions and struggles. It emerges in different historical periods.
Why are they doing
for
that?
different reasons and in
Why are
relation
they
to
doing
other
that,
forms
do you
of
think?
oppression. These different understandings not only
They're
impact
changing
how
the
we see
definition of
anti-Semitism, but also
anti-Semitism?
how we think about responding to it. that is distinct from or as part of and connected to other struggles against oppression. And next slide, please. We look at anti-Semitism in the US historically in relation to immigration and social, economic, political, and racial realities. And we see current forms of anti-Semitism, including white nationalist violence, tropes and stereotypes, philo-Semitism, among other forms. Next slide. We look at Jewish immigrants coming to the US from different parts of the world and how they faced discrimination and exclusion, along with other immigrant communities during different periods. At the same time, of course, African Americans and Native Americans continued to face severe marginalization, violence, and racism that has characterized the long history of racism and exploitation rooted in white supremacist structures and ideology.
Capitalist, that means
Next slide,
capitalist. They're trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism. That's crazy. To struggle against oppression. That's already the golden nugget of this entire presentation.
And we focus on some of the manifestations of anti-Semitism in the US today, beginning with the rise of
someone called the
ADL
immediately
Jews and against so many of our communities. And while we have highlighted places and ideologies that we believe anti-Semitism is most present and concerning, we also recognize that anti-Semitic attitudes and views, like all forms and manifestations of injustice, can show up among anyone who lives in our society. And next slide, please. We see how the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, exemplifies the nature of white nationalist violence in action. The rally's goal, rooted in anti-Black racism, called for the unification of the white nationalist movement and opposition to the proposed removal of the General Robert E. Lee statue. As part of their racist attacks, participants paraded in Klan robes and swastikas and shouted, "Jews will not replace us." Next slide, please. So stereotypes and tropes have been used historically and continue to be used in different ways that harm or mischaracterize Jews. We've seen the many ways that these characterizations of Jews continue to be articulated and used differently in different settings and can take different forms.
Manipulation, financial control, rich.
While it is critically important to understand what anti-Semitism is, equally important is to understand what anti-Semitism is not.
If Jews are rich, they're bourgeois.
Organized campaigns are derailing and misstating the meaning of anti-Semitism and falsely conflating it with criticism of Israel and Zionism. The misstating and distortion of what anti-Semitism is, it furthers political goals that are harmful to our work for justice, including that of ending anti-Semitism. Next slide, please. There are many, many examples of fabricated cases of anti-Semitism instigated by those standing in opposition to human rights and justice for the Palestinian people. These false accusations of anti-Semitism have intensified as people across the globe have spoken out and taken action in response to Israel's genocidal assault on the Palestinian people.
This is so socialist, I can't even take it. So goddamn socialist.
As we think about moving forward together, we ground ourselves in the long trajectory of those who have resisted injustice. We share examples of solidarities and foundational principles which reflect a commitment to collectively and intentionally challenging injustice together. We also explore challenges, possibilities, and strategies for working together for collective liberation. Next slide, please. And we can actually end the screen share. And I just want to thank you. And I also want to say that you don't have to be an expert in anti-Semitism to be able to bring this conversation to your school or your community. Clearly, we all can and do learn from one another as we put into practice our multiple commitments to liberation for all. And I'd like now to introduce Leslie Williams, who is our moderator for this evening's program. Leslie is an educator and organizer with Jewish Voice for Peace, the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, and the International Jewish Collective for Justice in Palestine. We are also so lucky that she is a project advisor and facilitator for our curriculum on anti-Semitism from a framework of collective liberation. Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you all.
Thank you, Nina, and welcome everyone. I am delighted and honored to be moderating this important discussion. There's a long and robust history of educators as social justice advocates, both inside and outside the classroom. Whether it was the freedom schools and citizenship schools during the civil rights movement or the ethnic studies movement in California, teachers have always played a role in guiding and supporting their students in how to combat racism, classism, and social injustice. Yet these efforts are often stymied by cautious administrators, fearful of controversy, and parents or other community members who feel that certain groups are being scapegoated or their children shamed. The curriculum battles we've seen recently in Florida over African American history and in Arizona over Mexican studies are but two recent examples. However, one of the most bitter divides is over the teaching of anti-Semitism and the teaching of Palestinian history. As educators in California and elsewhere push for a liberated ethnic studies curriculum that would include a comprehensive discussion of the Palestinian Nakba in the context of global anti-colonial struggle, many Jewish families and pro-Israel institutions have fought to undermine such programs, claiming they ignore and actually perpetuate anti-Semitism. Schools are hearing demands for standalone anti-Semitism curricula and mandates to teach about the Holocaust, when no such mandates exist for teaching about other forms of racism or other genocides. As the bombardment of Gaza continues and American societal divisions over Israel and Palestine are thrown into relief, what is the role of classroom teachers in addressing anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian racism alongside anti-Blackness and Islamophobia? Is it possible to teach anti-Semitism apart from these other forms of social oppression? How do we accurately present the overlapping identities of white Jewish Americans as both victims of anti-Semitism, but beneficiaries of white privilege?
Capitalism.
And finally, how do we respond to those who insist that schools and teachers should be neutral or objective on issues of social justice?
You can do that in a
I'm pleased to be joined today by four extraordinary teachers and social justice activists to help us dive into these questions. With me are Uju Agarwal, an educator and organizer who teaches at the New School University in New York.
I've seen them do presentations like this
and
before
the author
where they
of the
were
book,
live.
Unsettling Choice, Race, Rights, and the Partitioning of Public Education. Uju is also a community reviewer of Parseo's curriculum and is on Parseo's advisory board. Welcome, Uju. Next, we have Carlos Borrero.
That's the public school teacher.
Carlos has been an educator in New York City public schools for 24 years and is currently the principal of the High School for Community Leadership in Jamaica, Queens. Welcome, Carlos. Next, we have Natalia Ortiz.
It might be Milo, but I'm telling you, I've seen them do live presentations that look like this before.
And brings 18 years of experience as a classroom teacher, university professor, racial equity practitioner, coach, mentor, organizer, writer, and facilitator. She is currently a clinical assistant professor at New York University in the Department of Teaching and Learning,
NYU education professor,
educators, or NYCOR. Natalia, thank you for being here. And finally, we have Nassim Zarifi, who teaches history and current events and leads the activism project at Manhattan County School. He has taught at MCS for 10 years and has 17 years experience leading groups of students in designing and implementing activism campaigns in both public and private schools.
Isn't that
he
nice?
He is also a member of NYCOR. So welcome to all our panelists, and let's go ahead and dive into the conversation.
Public school teachers,
so I'd like to ask each of you to share a little bit about your work in your schools and your communities, and how you bring this focus on social justice, critical inquiry, and meaningful learning space to your students, teachers, and the broader community. And so I would love to start with Uju. I think you're muted. Nope. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction, and thank you to Nina and Donna from Parseo and Haymarket for bringing us together today. Really excited for this conversation and to learn from these amazing folks you've assembled. So how I enter this conversation is coming from working with Donna, actually for a very long time at this point, through an organization that we had built with others called the Center for Immigrant Families. It was a community organizing and education center of poor and working class immigrant women of color, rooted in popular education. And we didn't set out to organize around public schools, but we ended up organizing around kind of the intersection of public schools and gentrification.
Public schools.
And through that work, really thinking about kind of what does equity mean in schools,
equity
who do
means
public
socialism.
schools serve, and what are their limits, and what do we need to transform also. And I continue to work with a Head Start Center, actually, in the same neighborhood, the Bloomingdale Head Start Center, and a project there called the Parent Leadership Project that continues some of the work of CIF, really fighting for dignity and racial equity and economic justice in the public schools.
Equity means socialism.
In the neighborhood, in the district, in the
They're doing
city
all that
more
in
broadly.
public schools.
I also am part of Parseo, as you mentioned, and work with a group called Teachers Unite, and have more recently got into co-facilitate with Rosie Frashella,
it's a good idea. I should do that.
Group, an Inquiry into Action group, as part of Night Court.
I will do that.
And that's been really thinking about a lot of these questions of this that you just posed, Leslie, right? And thinking about the really broad and bold coalitions that came together in the aftermath of October 7th, and thinking about coming together to demand that our schools be sites of teaching justice, right? Rather than shutting down students, rather than sites of pushing forward Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiment and anti-Palestinian sentiment.
They're more worried about the Palestinians than they are about Israel.
Than anti-Black and racist sentiment more broadly. So these coalitions came together, and I think our job in this ITAG is to then think about, well, how do we continue them? So really think dialectically in this moment about what this moment is teaching us and how it's helping us expand and embolden our struggles for justice in our schools, and then necessarily integrate internationalism into them as well.
Thank you. And it's wonderful to hear the idea about coalition work. And I hope that in the second part of this conversation, we can dig into that a little bit more. So I'd like to pass it on to Carlos. Welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you all. I'm really excited to be a part of this project. And of course, thank Parseo and Haymarket for bringing this together. So my work in New York City public schools is really,
I think he does stuff with rethinking schools. I'm pretty sure he does
parallel strands of progressive educational thought that started to coalesce around the 90s. One was, this critical education theory that was really a response to some of the earlier Marxist work around education. The central question that they were engaged with was the question of agency within schools, within these state institutions, particularly to what degree do progressives within these institutions have the capacity to enact or to affect meaningful change. The other strand was really around the question of multiculturalism and how people had, from marginalized groups, had been working around expanding what was pretty widely accepted as a Eurocentric curriculum. And so how to make the curriculum more representative of the diversity that existed in schools and in society. And so
thanks, Tayton.
We came into existence as a product of all of this sort of theoretical work and a lot of the organizing work that was taking place, but also interesting and very importantly enough, we were also at a critical moment in which the ruling elites, the ruling classes themselves, were beginning to question the traditional school system. And many were advocating for reforms sort of from this functionalist perspective in which the schools were seen as, a ground to prepare students for the future economy. So there were a lot of, sort of social factors that came together, and in a place like New York City,
They literally don't say
interestingly
that.
enough,
You just made that
for about
up.
a
They
decade and
don't
a
say
half,
that.
there was a big push to create new schools. This wasn't an explicitly progressive project, but there were many progressives that found a space within this movement. And so there were some projects that were really innovative, they were really interesting, and people were really thinking critically about how to create or open up these progressive spaces, whether it was around the way schools were organized, the relationships within the schools between the working people within the schools, the teachers and the students, and critically for this discussion, the question of curricula, right? That was a critical component of this sort of school reform movement, of which we were a part. And one of the interesting and really unresolved questions with this movement that we were grappling with, and we continue to grapple with, is this question of multiculturalism from a framework of the sort of pluralist tradition that we've been exposed to, versus a more universalist tradition that is really a part of the progressive thinking historically. And so this has been something that we've grappled with as we, on the one hand, embrace diversity, but on the other hand, we have to sort of guard against, and we've attempted to guard against, this idea of enclosing people within these ascribed groups, and really not so much as celebrating diversity, but really homogenizing really complex identities. And so that's where we are, and we're still grappling with this question, but I think it ties really well into the question of collective liberation versus a concept of liberation that's limited to an individual group.
Yes, and I would love to dig more into that universalism versus multiculturalism, because I think that is a very
We are
common
not free until everyone is free.
misconception of what multiculturalism is.
They mean
so
abolishing
so
capitalism when they say that.
All right, next we are going to go to Natalia.
Hello. Thank you again for having me.
I'm pretty sure we've seen Natalia before.
Engage in this awesome dialogue with
I
these
could be wrong, but
beautiful people that you all have gathered. So thank you for thinking of me and the New York Collective of Radical Educators, because part of how I come to the work, and it's important for me to just lift up my history with the NICOR in particular. So I come to the conversation as a former high school social studies teacher in Brooklyn, New York. And I was introduced to the New York Collective of Radical Educators by my longtime mentor, Keith Catone, who actually
radical
was my
means
mentor
socialist.
teacher when I was learning how to teach. And he was one of the founding members of the New York Collective of Radical Educators. And so it's important, just a quick little history here. So NICOR folks, the 6 founding members, came together in protests against US government military response to 9/11. And they were coming together because they were really upset with the ways that there was intentional military recruitment of youth of color in particular in their schools. And so ever since that was back in 2002. And so it's 20 years old, more than 22 now, right? Where the collective of teachers have continued their work. And so this small group of teachers kept meeting, created a mission, wrote out 10 points of unity inspired by the Young Lords and the Black Panthers that really have shaped and guided our work and every iteration of leadership and membership over the last 20 years. So that's how I come to the conversation. And just, something to keep in mind is we are both current and former public school educators. We like to be explicit about talking about education because we understand that education is both teachers who are inside the classroom Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., but also educators are social workers, youth development folks, right? After school folks, community organizer, adult ed. And so we welcome all folks to come to our meetings and do the work with us. And
everyone can be a
so part of the way
socialist.
that we do the work, we fight for social justice in our school system and society at large by organizing and mobilizing teachers, developing curriculum, working with student, parent,
developing
and community organizations, because that's also important, that we really do try to like partner with all the amazing folks that are doing good work. And part of we try to provide a political home for radical educators, critical professional development. So really doing this like learning, unlearning, unpacking, right? With, of course, understanding like systemic oppression and having an analysis that critiques power so that we can fight for and towards collective liberation. So some of the ways that we do this is we hold open meetings where we bring topics that are ongoing fights, right, against neoliberalism. But sometimes we also hold open meetings that are responsive to the moment. And so that is what brought us to this particular conversation. Because of course, when in November, we were thinking about the ways that we needed to be responsive to our teachers, to our students and communities, is like, well, we can't ignore this, right? Because every decision is a choice to either engage or not engage. And because we know that we have to like live into our points of unity, we were like, all right, sometimes we take the lead to facilitate conversations. But for this one, it seemed like we needed to call on some colleagues, some experts in the field. And so we, of course, have been working and organizing with Donna Neville for a very long time, who then introduced us to Nina, who then put us on to like Parseo and this curriculum in particular, which we happily brought in for them to facilitate just the curriculum and conversations with our teachers and core teachers. So in addition, I just want to lift up the Inquiry to Action groups. This is something that we've been organizing for many years as well. And we heard Uju and Nasim, both of who are facilitating, and they're really what it is, it's inquiry. So 6 weeks of study by teachers for teachers, which then ends with some action. And so I will end there because I know we want to get into some awesome conversation. And I think that's a great kind of like handoff, because I believe, I'm not sure if Nasim is next, but if he is.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned, because I'm not sure if everybody on this call knows what an ITAG is, so thank you for explaining that. And for people that have worked with, say, Teachers for Social Justice, that's another organization that does wonderful ITAGs. So Nasim, take it away.
Thank you for the handoff, Natalia. I've been working at Manhattan Country School for the last 10 years. I was at an organization called Global Kids for 7 years before that. So for something like 17 years, I've been leading activism campaigns or facilitating activism campaigns, student-led activism campaigns with adolescents. I also teach history and current events. There's a certain tension between teaching history and facilitating activism campaigns, which I think gets to some of the topics we're talking about tonight, where, you know, as a history teacher, I want to just kind of present information and conflicting narratives and allow students to use primary sources to kind of evaluate the evidence of which narrative is stronger and kind of leave my opinion out of it. And as an organizer and activist, what you want to do is kind of present a narrative, get people riled up, fired up, and ready to go. So there's a certain balance there. And I think for me, you know, when we do activism, it's entirely the students have all the decision-making power. So they choose the topic they want to focus on, they choose what they want to do about that topic, what they want to focus on. And then once they've kind of made their decisions, come to their conclusions, right now our campaign is about substance abuse, drug abuse. And so now that they've heard from some experts and done some research, they're talking about harm reduction. And now once they've decided this is what we think is right and what we should do, then I can kind of go into organizer mode and kind of affirm their own ideas back to them and strengthen that and get them kind of riled up and ready to take action. I think it's really important. I would say for me, a couple things I really want to highlight, that doing activism with young people, with adolescents, to me is the perfect pedagogy. It hits all the intellectual work that you want them to do, critical thinking, systems thinking, persuasive writing, analytical thinking, et cetera, et cetera. It also takes all the kind of risky behaviors of adolescence and channels that in a positive direction. So they want to be a part of something powerful, right? That could be a gang, or it could be a movement. They want to challenge authority, right? That could be the teacher in the room, or it could be their elected representative who they're going to go lobby and discuss with, right? They want to take risks. That could be smoking cigarettes, or it could be like marching down the street and yelling and doing all those kinds of things. So there's that. I also think that doing activism mitigates against the trauma of watching all of the terrible things that might be happening that they are taking in. And I think that when you are feeling helpless, like you have no agency to do anything about it, it can be quite traumatizing. So giving students an outlet, I think, is important. The other piece I would say about that is we don't live in a kingdom. We're not subjects. We're citizens, and that, democracy, we're trying to prepare students to be engaged citizens in a pluralistic democracy. So they have to be able to engage with different perspectives.
That means
socialism. They have to be able to work with other people to come up with solutions and then implement those solutions. And I think they don't need to wait till the future to be leaders. I think they can do it now.
That's parental rights.
I do work with NICOR. I'm facilitating my second ITAG.
They don't need to wait to be leaders. They can do it now.
And organizing for Palestine.
That's
really
also
been
Palafieri.
And great. I would also say there's this theme of collective liberation, and I think this will come up later, but one thing in my history classes that I really try to highlight with students is that, like, our race issues in America, to my understanding, is just another iteration of the colonial divide and conquer strategy. So it takes different forms in different countries, but if you look at any country that was colonized,
capitalism,
they found whatever fissures and divisions and use that to separate people who actually have a lot in common as their primary strategy. And so the remedy to that is finding the connections of different oppressed groups, right, who've been told that they should have an animosity towards each other, or are separate from each other, or resentful towards each other, and realize that is just a hustle that they've been running on us for hundreds of years, and it's still working. So I think, the theme of collective liberation is really, really important for us to see the connections between different groups, and something I think we'll talk about tonight. So I'm really grateful to Parseo and Haymarket and my fellow panelists for having this conversation. Also, I would say, on a personal note, as someone who is half Jewish and half Arab, talking about anti-Semitism in this context is, I think, so important. And so needed, and unfortunately is not happening in nearly as many places as it should be. So I'm really eager to get into some of our topics today. So I'll wrap it up there.
Okay, thanks so much. So lots of wonderful ideas and thoughts that came out of that introduction. So a couple of things that I wanted to throw out. Carlos mentioned the difference between a multicultural perspective and a universalist perspective. And we were also talking about anti-Semitism, and Nassim, you had just said that we don't always think of anti-Semitism as being part of the collective liberation. And unfortunately, it has often been presented as though working against anti-Semitism is somehow in opposition to working against Islamophobia.
They're trying to change the definition.
Anti-Palestinian racism. So how do we, with using this collective liberation framework, how do we address that tension, particularly in schools that may not be as forward-thinking as the schools that you're in, schools that may be suburban, rural, maybe have more leery administrations? So as I said, we're going to go in the opposite direction. So Nassim, you get to finish your thought. And then
great.
We'll move on to Carlos and Natalia and Uju.
Yeah, and I would say, like, right here in New York City, in like supposedly progressive, independent schools and public schools, there's a lot of resistance to even having any of these conversations at the moment. There's a huge amount of fear that people have about broaching the subject. People are really quiet when they need to be loud. I think there's some really, that perceived contrast is so false to me. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are very parallel. For example, when, just on a personal note, when Trump was elected and he tried to institute
it's about being oppressed.
I felt like it was, you have
according to the new definition,
minority being targeted by a fascist, right? So if he's targeting my Muslim half, but in a way that was very triggering to my Jewish half, because it's exactly the same policy. When we talked about Syrian refugees, when that conflict was happening, my students did an activism campaign about Islamophobia and Syrian refugees. And we looked at the arguments that
my students did an activism campaign.
Syrian refugees in, and they were exactly the same arguments about why people didn't let in Jewish refugees fleeing World War II. You know, everyone reads Anne Frank, but we don't talk about the fact that Anne Frank's parents tried to come to the United States and were rejected. You know, we frame in the United States, we frame the conversation around Nazism and anti-Semitism mostly just around the Holocaust. And that way we are able to say, like, oh, look at those terrible Nazis over there, and we were the good people who defeated the Nazis, right? Never mind the fact that the Nazis got so much of their ideology from eugenics, you know, pseudoscience from the United States. As the book Cass points out, they thought that our Jim Crow laws were a little too harsh for the Nazis, right? And then even white American soldiers would sit with the Nazi prisoners of war before they sat with Black American soldiers, you know, during World War II, and they refused to let in all these the Jewish refugees. And in fact, that is a big part of the reason why there was so much support for Zionism in Europe and in the United States, was it was an interest convergence. They said, fantastic, you know, you guys, you know, want a homeland somewhere else?
Right.
We'd be happy to see you go. You know, no problem there. You can also, in exchange, you can kind of be our representative or in that region, you know, and help facilitate our interests in the Middle East. And so I think it's really important to talk about anti-Semitism with some political consciousness of its origins, of its existence in the United States, of the parallels that it shows with Islamophobia today, and other forms of discrimination and prejudice. And so I think in our schools, one thing I really want to highlight right now is part of the reason why teachers, I think, and administrators are afraid to talk about Israel and Palestine right now is because they understand that people are on very different sides, have very kind of opposing realities on this issue, and they don't want to open up a conversation that's going to highlight the divides that exist, because they don't know how to heal that or fix that. And in my experience, it seems like a lot more students of color tend to identify more with the Palestinian cause.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And whereas more Jewish students might have grown up in a house that may be anti-Zionist or might be Zionist, or they might just say, okay, Israel relates to my identity, therefore I have to side with Israel. And so they're afraid of widening those divides between students. But I think if you talk about anti-Semitism with some political consciousness from a perspective of collective liberation, you open the opportunity for a dialogue that finds connections between students that weren't necessarily seeing those connections. You know, and I think that's super important for us to do, is to not look at different systems of oppression
as different.
As in isolation, you know, and I think it unfortunately human beings.
This is also going to allow them to call the like legitimately rich Jews like Bill Ackman anti-Semites.
In other ways, you know, you can
people understand that, right?
And still be homophobic.
They're going to call Bill Ackman an anti-Semite based on this definition.
And still be racist. And so we need to intentionally look at the connections between these different things from an intersectional perspective.
Look at collective liberation.
Correct. And look at why these things exist. Why does discrimination doesn't just exist because people are stupid. It serves a purpose for somebody. You know, somebody is benefiting from racism. Somebody's benefiting from sexism. Someone's benefiting from anti-Semitism.
Exactly like
so
that.
We have to look at it from that context.
So Naseem, I want to bring Natalia in, but hold that thought. So Natalia.
Yeah. No, something that I was thinking about actually, Naseem, to build off of what you were saying, is like even thinking about this piece around like teachers, right, are afraid to open up the conversation in their classrooms. And part of it is also like the fear, right? The fear and feeling the need to like hold space for healing and fixing it. And then I heard you name this piece around like entering the conversation with political consciousness. And finding commonalities. And I think that's where like this NICOR, right? And what we try to do is like provide that political consciousness, the history, right? Which is why we brought in this curriculum on anti-Semitism from a framework of collective liberation, because we knew that while teachers want to be responsive to their students, I hear a little feedback. Is that just me? Okay. While teachers want to be responsive to their students' families, right? Part of the fear that was coming up is the fear to be called anti-Semitic, right? And interestingly, there was this piece of like, well, I don't know enough,
I can't
right?
imagine why.
This like, it's too complicated, right? So if I open up this container or this space in the class and I don't have the time, nor the capacity, nor the conditions to continue the conversation, like, what does that look like? How can I do this in ways that are affirming to students, that is centering collective liberation? And so that is why we were like, okay, we really need to hold or create space for our teachers to really understand what anti-Semitism is and the real horror, right? And how that is systemic oppression and violence and what that has looked like over the years, both in the US and globally. And also, right, alongside that, equally as important, understanding how anti-Semitism is also dangerously being conflated with anti-Zionism. And so when thinking about this through that collective liberation framework, we knew that part of supporting, right, Palestinian students and families is to also understand the real lived experiences and realities and the systemic oppression of anti-Semitism, and also what it is not, right? I'll stop there.
All right. Carlos, your thoughts?
So I think that it's important to be honest about the fact that every decision to include or exclude content or discussion in school is or particularly in a curriculum, it's a political decision. For those that in some of the areas, as you were mentioning, perhaps, maybe rural areas,
every decision to include or exclude content in schools is a political decision.
Depoliticization of schools, they're actually engaged in a form of politics. That's a form of politics, and we should recognize that, and we should stop pretending that there is no intrusion of politics in schools. I mean, anyone that's ever attended a school board meeting understands that, right? The questions that we should be asking are, what kind of politics, what kinds of values do we want our schools to embody, right? That's the real question, I think, and I think that we should embrace that. The other reality that we have to kind of grapple with is that in any time of acute sort of social and political crisis, all of the institutions of society are going to be put to a test, right? Like, it is impossible to go, I would imagine it's impossible to go to a school in the United States currently that doesn't have publicly written somewhere or doesn't espouse a certain set of values, right? A school individually or a district will say, we value critical thinking. We want to build the critical thinking skills of the students. We value equality. We value tolerance, justice, integrity, all these things. It's in social crises that we see the fidelity with which those that lead these institutions actually, are embracing those values. And, invariably, because schools don't exist in a bubble, all of these moments where you see people are in the streets, where you see the youth that have done an amazing job mobilizing, these are moments in which, the schools are put, and other social institutions are put to the test. And in some instances, we're able to grapple with these questions and create these spaces for these very difficult conversations. And then, unfortunately, all too many situations, the move is to suppress, whether it's, making this argument that, that politics don't belong in schools, or there are more sort of overt forms of repression that are used to suppress these very difficult conversations. And so I think the question is not that it will, whether or not it's going to happen, whether or not young people and all people are going to engage in this kind of civil discourse. The question is, how do we structure it so that something positive comes out of it?
Yes, it
right?
was.
And so certainly to
Yes,
Nazim's
it
point, you know,
was.
this sort of this view that it's this side against the other side, and you know, the win for this particular side, understood as a monolithic group, which it really isn't, right, represents a loss for this other group, that has proven bankrupt. And we need to move more towards a collective liberation kind of view, a view that prizes solidarity and sort of more universalist principles in my mind.
Okay. And, you know, I mean, just something, if we have time, I'd love to get all of your reactions. We often hear that, you know, this is too divisive, that this is going to, but that talking about these issues is going to destroy unity, and not just with Israel and Palestine, but, you know, again, in Florida with Black Lives Matter, that talking about that in schools is going to make white kids feel bad, that it's going to lead to division. So, you know, are there ways that we can do this collective liberation and address that concern? But for now, Udra, I'm going to give it to you. You can address that question or another question, whichever one you want.
Okay. Well, I want to bring us, I think that maybe in some ways bringing us back to just how the curriculum itself, it provides us with an organizing framework, is really helpful. So it's both kind of content, but then also the pedagogy of it, right? That I think is so important. And by that, I mean that it helps us think through questions of how do dominant narratives about our communities get constructed, right? Who do they serve? How can we think about questions of, as others have indicated, questions of power rather than just simply individual attitudes or behaviors or beliefs, right? How do we root those in kind of, again, structures and systems, as others have said? How do we think about historical contingency and context, right? To better understand then the links between racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, right? And more. What changes, what stays the same over time and place, but also again in relationship to how power is shifting and different historical conjunctures that we find ourselves in. And also, of course, then liberation movements, right? How power is then responding to solidaristic movements of resistance, of broader visions of liberation, and trying to then segment us or make us believe that
that's
it's
what it
only
means
our
to be in
freedom
solidarity.
we can fight for, whoever ours is supposed to be in that context, right?
You are a
and so
comrade.
I think some of the ways that the curriculum pushes us to think not just about history, but also about our present is really important. To think about then what are the solidarities we can forge in thinking beyond kind of allyship, right? But really broad and bold solidarities that are about a transformation of power that maybe leave us in a different situation than where we began, hopefully. And so I think in some ways it helps us think about how do we understand what is happening with all the repression that others have mentioned are happening at the level that students, that teachers, that parents are facing, but then also some of the ways that, you know, dominant power moves through kind of liberalism as well. So for example, you know, on one hand, there was a doxing truck outside of an elementary school around the corner from where I live. On the other hand, we see restorative justice circles being used as punitive measures, right? That punish people for taking stands and say, okay, well, you have to hold a circle now in order to hold account for what you taught or what you said or what you did. And I think that's a tactic that turns, of course, the intention of restorative justice on its head, but also something that Black and Indigenous organizers have long been kind of saying, hey, there's something weird about how dominant power has absorbed some of the tactics that are meant to transform it, not be absorbed by it. So I say that as somebody who's just trying to think through kind of right now, well, what are these contradictions in teaching us, right? And how does a curriculum really help us kind of move away from that kind of, as you were saying, Carlos, the kind of, move away from a stance that says that maintaining the status quo is in some way equitable, and rather direct us to understanding the violence embedded in a stance like that.
Maintaining
right?
the status quo is literally
thinking
violence.
Again about kind of how, we need to be really thinking about how structures and systems of power are embedded in our schools and communities, and work to then transform them. Natalia, something you were talking about kind of in an earlier conversation about learning history is not comfortable, right? And it's not necessarily easy, but does that mean that it's harmful, right? So how I think part of what the curriculum really does and gives us tools and a way of helping us think through is how we can think outside of a state, kind of the state's mentality that tells us only redress for harm or trauma is, for example, the expansion of the criminal legal system or hate crimes legislation, right? To really thinking about, well, okay, what is power doing in this moment, and how do we need to work to transform it?
Wonderful, wonderful. So we have a huge 2 minutes left. We may be able to push it a little bit beyond that, but I'd love to get just a final comment from each of you, thinking maybe, again, that our audience is teachers all over the country.
Yes,
who
we are
may be
definitely
kind of
teachers.
new to doing this,
Absolutely.
to seeing activism as part of their work. How can they find solidarity and support, and how have you as educators, as radical educators, found solidarity and support? So Uju, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing is thinking about kind of, again, I think the curriculum does this. I think we can think about which stories we tell and which ones we don't. So there, in the fall, people were saying often, right, this idea of, well, Palestine is freeing us. And I think we can think about, well, what does that mean for those of us
Palestine is freeing us.
Residing inside of the belly of the beast? How is it pushing us to expand our radical imaginations, our freedom dreams?
Radical means socialist.
How we think again about interconnectedness and internationalism. I think it pushes us to something very basic that was true for my parents' generation, who grew up during British colonialism, right, and lived through it, which was a vision of third world liberation that was never about just one place or one people, but about a transformed world, right? And that it's our duty to fight for that. And whether that's in schools or see that as kind of in all aspects of life. So it's interconnected and it's intertwined. And I think, again, that's one of the things that the curriculum makes clear.
Great, thank you. Carlos.
I think one of the great values of this type of curriculum, and certainly I got a chance to look at a lot of these materials, is in dispelling this idea of one sort of monolith, right? So these people groups, as we embrace multiculturalism to the point, or up until the point in which we talk about the diversity within the group, right? And so for many students that perhaps don't have a direct relationship with some of the groups, let's say the Jewish experience, they don't realize the incredible diversity of that experience, right? They don't realize the contributions that are made. And they also don't realize that there are real practical examples of solidarity, even within the context of Palestine. That are important. And so this question that I must align myself with a sort of right-wing representative of this group, this group identity that was ascribed to me, is challenged by this kind of curriculum. And I think that is something that is critically important at this moment. And I think that we're seeing practical examples of it every day among the youth that are organizing not just Palestinian youth that are heroically organizing, but also Jewish youth in countries like the United States that are heroically organizing on the basis of these universalist, these collective liberation kinds of principles. And I think that that needs to be elevated and applauded and supported.
Yes, thank you so much. Natalia.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the both and, because I feel like if teachers are looking to do this work, and I know it can sometimes, especially if you're kind of new into like learning and trying activism and understanding that your role as a teacher is to, what Carlos was saying before, right? Like teaching is not neutral. Like everything is political, right? A choice to teach or not teach. And so if we're kind of embracing this idea, like what can I do? Well, right, it's important to study. I always think about Paulo Freire, right, who talks about reflection and action. Praxis. Like every time you learn, you reflect, you become a new you, right? It's like a dialectical process of learning and engaging and then being a different person. And so what does it mean to do that, right? To find the knowledge. This curriculum has it all, right? It has knowledge, history, power analysis, intersectional oppression, understanding that. And so like studying this oppression, starting this curriculum, starting there is important, but community. Like I would not be the teacher I am, the educator I am, if at the age of, well, I don't want to tell you how old I was when I met Keith or like started to engage at NICOR, but like part of what had me feel stronger in the classroom to try things, to engage in difficult conversations, to teach true history, even though it was maybe at times scary, but honest and real, was because I knew I was not alone. And when I say I was not alone, I'm not even talking about like my school.
True history means
socialist
history.
Like, there are educators across the country, right? Teacher activist group, T4SJ, TSJ, People's Ed Movement.
Teacher activist groups are
there's a Free Minds, Free People
true
conference that happens every 2 years that gathers teachers, professors, students, community organizers, parents that come together to talk about social justice education issues, right? And see like the interconnectedness of all of our fights and struggles.
Thank you, Tayton.
There's folks doing ethnic studies across the country, a liberated ethnic studies curriculum, right? So it's out there. It just requires like time, connection, and engagement. So that's, yes, community.
Indeed. Nassim, you get the last word.
Okay.
And I don't see that
I want
message.
to uplift this idea that Jewish people are not a monolith. And I think
never mind.
The fear of being labeled anti-Semitic is real because there are real world consequences to that. I know as a Jewish person, I've been a little more brave speaking up because if someone challenges me, like, I feel like I can say, my grandfather was a rabbi. Like my life has been threatened because I'm Jewish. Like, but it's harder for other people, I think, to have this conversation with the fear of being labeled anti-Semitic. But to me, I think the idea that you can just make Jewish people a monolith and then associate them with the policies of the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. And as a Jewish person, the thing that makes me feel the least safe is that idea that the policies of the state of Israel, the actions of the state of Israel represents each Jewish person, right? That we are then able to be held responsible for what Israel as a country does. The other thing I would say is that people tend to look at history, right, differently than they look at the present. So when Black Lives Matter movement was starting before George Floyd, right, current events teachers went to a conference and people were not talking about it in their current events classes. And I was like, how? And so I was doing a professional development at this conference and I pulled up, the polls during the civil rights movement to show how unpopular the civil rights movement was at the time. Now today, every single person, right wing, left wing, doesn't matter who, is going to say that they would have supported Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. At the time, that was not the case, And so to just have that context that, we tend to look at the kind of radical movements of the past as acceptable today when they were not at all accepted at the time. And
look at how they're using MLK to push socialism, although he was a socialist.
What would I have said? Which side would I have been on? Would I have spoken up or not? And
people
today
say they'd be on his side today, but they didn't back then.
You can even have these conversations to say, like, yeah, this is a controversial thing to talk about. Isn't that our job? Is it not our job to help our students to engage in controversial, difficult, real-world conversations, to see different perspectives that conflict with each other, to try and, if they have their own opinion, to then provide support or evidence for their own opinion? That's our job, right? And people who might say, well, this curriculum doesn't reflect the dominant Jewish narrative. fantastic. If there is a dominant narrative that's in the mainstream culture, don't you then want to present contrasting narratives for your students to be able to engage in ideas? Isn't that what school is about, right? To allow them to come to their own conclusions from seeing different perspectives. I think that's really important, really crucial. And I think, you do need your community there. Like Natalia said, and there are resources out there. There are people out there that you can connect with, but you also just need to be brave. And I understand if you're like a brand new teacher and you're trying not to lose your job is one thing, but I think there's a lot of people who are conflating safety with comfort, and we're putting the comfort of the most powerful students before the safety of the least powerful students consistently, right? We don't want to talk about Black Lives Matter because we don't want white kids to be uncomfortable. What about the Black kids who are seeing this happening? They're having their own conversations. And that's the other thing. The kids are talking already. Whether we bring it up as teachers or not, whether we have a skillful, facilitated conversation or not, they are already talking. Harm is already happening. Divisions are already known, right? It is our job to facilitate that and make that work in a more healthy way in our classes.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'm afraid we're going to have to close this out. But if you are a teacher, activist, educator, you would like to know more about the anti-Semitism curriculum from a framework of collective liberation and get some of the resources that we talked about, you can get in touch with Parseo by going to antisemitismcurriculum.org. You can also email Parseo at antisemitismcurriculum@gmail.com. And I just want to thank again our terrific panelists. Man, would I have loved to have had any of you as my teacher in high school. Nasim Zarifi, Natalia Ortiz,
I already got the link, don't worry about it.
Barrero, and Uju Agarwal. So thank you all so much. And thank you to Nina and Donna and Parseo and to all of you for attending. And we will see you in the streets and in the classroom. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Haymarket Books. We love you. Thank you, Haymarket Books. We appreciate you. Okay, two big takeaways from that. One, we got a clip where they were overtly admitting, a 24-year veteran of the New York City public schools overtly admitting that whatever you include in the curriculum or take out of the curriculum is an overtly political action. They're saying the schools are inherently political. The schools are designed to push political values. So we got that clip. The biggest thing, though, from that entire presentation is they are trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism. Why are they trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism? Because they all support Palestine and they all support Hamas because they all think that this is their glorious revolution against the settler colonists, that is Israel. In this case, Israel and the Jews. Well, they're not going to say the Jews anymore because they're trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism. Israel and the Zionists represent capitalism. They represent the private property owners that colonized Palestine. And so they are fully in support of Hamas booting their asses off their land and having their glorious revolution. And I'm saying what they think. I'm not saying what I think. I'm saying what they think. I don't agree with Hamas. I don't like Hamas. I don't co-sign Hamas. I am anti-war and anti-genocide. That is all war and all genocide. I am saying what they think, YouTube. So the reason they're trying to change the definition of anti-Semite, though, is that they all support Hamas. They all got raked over the coals for being called anti-Semitic because they didn't realize how powerful the lobby they were going against actually was, because they're used to getting their own way. But in this case, they got a little bit of pushback. Now, they're still going to win long term. It doesn't matter. But what they're trying to do is to say that Jews, like being anti-Semitic, is about being against an oppressed class. They're trying to say that anti-Semitism is only a thing when Jews are oppressed. And if they're not oppressed, like is in the case, I promise you, they're going to use this to try to say Bill Ackman is an anti-Semite. I promise you. They're going to say Bill Ackman is a literal billionaire that is throwing his weight around and da-da-da. He is not oppressed under the system. In fact, he is, what did someone say? The Jewish face of anti-Semitism in the chat. Was it something like yeah, they're literally going to say Bill Ackman is the Jewish face of anti-Semitism, just like they said Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy or something to that effect. But that's the big thing. They're trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism so that it applies to all oppressed people, or just seeing them as an oppressed class or something like that, so that they can still support Palestine and all this stuff without being called anti-Semites. And what they're going to do is they're going to say, no, you don't understand. This isn't anti-Semitic to do this because we're talking about an oppressed people, so it's okay. Man, what a time to be alive. All right, guys. Well, that was our socialism live stream. I appreciate you all joining us. Now, I still have one more stream to do today. Of course, I'm going to go take a little break. I'm going to go get some dinner. I will be back in about 45 minutes to do nothing remotely controversial with Joshua. I will see you guys then. Thanks for hanging out. Mount the like button on the way out the door. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you are not already. If tarot cards and psychicking and the news are not your thing, I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. for the normal stream. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.